Hey everyone, and welcome to another one of my weekly art videos. I hope you're having an amazing day wherever you are in the world, and thanks so much for joining me on this one. In today's video, I am taking you through my sketching process for two different birds in flight. I made sure to choose reference photos that showed two very different types of birds in very different positions. This way, I can make sure to share the two main methods that I use when sketching birds in order to arrive at effective shapes and proportions and arrive at a believable looking sketch. Along the way, I'll be sharing everything that I make sure to have in mind, my main tips that will help you succeed with not only sketching birds, but also sketching animals in general. And I'll even be explaining how I bring in my artistic license to loosen up some aspects while maintaining a certain level of realism, and how I bring in things from imagination to create a little background and context for the animal on hand. All right, without much further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. First, I'm gonna start with this beautiful yellow bird right here. So what do I notice here in terms of possible challenges, interesting things, negative spaces between limbs or body parts, overlapping sections, that kind of thing. So when it comes to birds in flight, oftentimes we're going to notice that there's a lot of overlapping happening, primarily with the wings. When it comes to the flow line in this one, I see a diagonal. This isn't one of those birds with longer necks. Birds with longer necks can definitely create very interesting flow lines if we bring in that neck into the flow line, that is. They can even create C curves or S curves. But for this one, because of the position of the bird and the fact that this particular bird doesn't have that long of a neck, I see kind of a diagonal. So I'm just going to go with something like that for the flow line. I'm not going to make it super stiff. I am going to bring in the head into the flow line. So the head would be somewhere around here. Its head is pretty small. And this is the bottom part of the bird where the tail feathers start. Okay, so notice that section in the very bottom of the bird's body where the edge of the largest mass of its body, you could say, meets the tail feathers. Okay, right now I'm tuning out the feathers, but that's where I'm ending that flow line. Maybe I'm just gonna slightly angle it more over here. Okay, so here we go. Now that this flow line is in, I'm gonna start adding in the rib cage. And because I am visualizing the head right here as part of the flow line, I'm gonna go down below that, give a little bit of space there, and start my rib cage shape somewhere around here. And then we have the pelvis. So I'm gonna add the pelvis over here. If the bird was more facing towards us, so we were closer to its head than to its tail, the rib cage would be closer to the hips and maybe even overlapping the hip shape. That's kind of what I see there for those two body masses. And then when it comes to the head, I'm just gonna add a simple shape over here, way smaller than the other two masses, because that's kind of what I see in terms of proportions in the photo. And this I'm doing very intuitively, just observing the length of the neck for this bird. If I have to bring down the cranium shape more, I'll do it later. But for now, this is enough to move on to the next part of the process. All right, so birds' anatomies are way different from mammals such as horses and dogs and cats, because we just have two legs and we have large wings. What I like doing for birds when it comes to adding in the smaller landmarks, I like just noticing the top edge of their wings. So what I mean by this is notice where the wing starts, and I'm noticing the wing closest to us first, and then I'll add in the other one. Where does that wing shape or the edge start? And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a little circle where the angle of the top edge of the wing changes, and then I'm gonna bring this down. And really that's all I'm gonna do. And when it comes to this wing opposite to us, I'm gonna notice where the wing starts, that upper edge of the wing, and I'm gonna just place a little circle where the wing starts changing direction or angle. And something that is helpful here, just to notice if locations are looking okay, you could create a line for the bottom of the wing opposite to us, so that you can compare this bottom edge of the wing opposite to us and this upper edge of the wing nearest us to these edges in the reference photo by noticing this negative V shape in between them, this gap. All right, but that's really all I do and all I need for now for those wings. I am not going to be adding in the equivalent of a wrist because really I'm going to simplify the rest of the wing into a shape, and then I'll separate out that shape into more individual feathers. And I'll do that in just a bit. But I do want to add in the legs very quickly. The upper part of the legs are very much covered by this wing right here. So I'm just gonna intuitively add in the legs and a very simplified triangular shape for the little claws. I don't want to make them too large. That's kind of what I see. And then the tail feather shape is also just going to be simplified into an envelope that is going to be later separated out very quickly into individual feathers. I'm going to start fleshing out this animal more. Right now it looks very weird. I need more shape there to the body. I'm going to create envelopes for the wings and then add in the head, because I do feel that maybe I need to bring the head down a little bit, but we'll see. So this wing opposite to us flips. This is the upper part of the wing, and then it kind of flips and we're able to see the inner planes of the wing down here. Large wings extend out. And I'm just going to simplify this into an envelope, and this envelope comes all the way down until here. I'm going to erase this line here, and that's kind of a very basic general shape for this wing opposite to us. You can see that as an envelope. I always use envelopes, especially in these beginning parts of the sketching process. And for this wing over here, I'm going to bring this line up a little bit more. I'm noticing how much of the legs this wing is covering, how much of the lower part of the bird's body is it covering, and this is kind of the shape that I end up with. So let me erase this entire portion under the wing there, and whatever parts of the body I'm able to see through the feathers, I'll add in later. Okay, but that's kind of the very basic shape that I see for the wing. How about the tail feathers? The back part of its body is visible there, and then the tail feathers start somewhere around here and they go out. I'm ignoring the little feet for now, and I'm going to do a third envelope for these feathers. Back portion of the animal's body goes into the tail feathers, kind of like that. Now that I have added in the envelope for the wing, I am noticing the distance between the top of the bird's head and the top edge of the wing in the photo versus my sketch, and I do notice way much of a larger area here, a larger distance between these two edges in the photo than what I have in my sketch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase the head, and I'm just going to bring it down closer to what I see there. So I'm going to create a little tick mark where I want the top of the head to be in relation with this top edge. And now that I have that tick mark there, I'm just going to lower this cranium shape. I'm going to see if I like the placement within that larger wing envelope more. I'm just going to make any corrections that I need to make. I'm going to clean this up a little. And I think that that does look a lot better. Proportions look a lot better. Now that I have the cranium shape a lot closer to what I need it to be, I just want to start adding in a little indication of that beak. So I'm noticing the size, the shape, and the location of the beak there in the photo. This particular bird has quite a small beak. And beaks are also a very important characteristic that we have to pay attention to, because different types of birds have different sizes and shapes of beaks. And if we don't get it right, it might end up not looking like that particular bird that we're trying to draw. I do notice up here that the bird's head is quite round here and then kind of flat at the back. And I'm starting to notice the location of the eye within that head shape. I'll do any refinements on those things later. For now, I just wanted to get a little little indication of the beak there. Now that I've added in the beak, I have more points of comparison. I can now see that maybe I need to bring this up because this bottom edge of the wing is closer to the beak than what I have here. I'm gonna take a quick second to clean up my sketch a little with my kneaded eraser. I can erase the little circles that I created for the wings. And what I am noticing now is that my placement for the little bird's feet is way too low. I'm gonna erase these. Noticing the reference photo, I can tell that the tiny little claws in the bird's feet come down a little bit past this edge right here, the very bottom part of the bird's body, and my little feet were down way too low. I'm gonna bring down the bird's belly a little bit more. So the bird's belly would go through the wing and down into the very bottom part of the bird's body here, the bottom edge. So what am I able to see for the little feet shape through the wing feathers for the feet? And I just simplify those two little feet into very basic shapes and got them in closer to where I see them in the photo. Behind the little feet shape, we see the tail feathers. Now that I have the feet where I want them, if there's anything that I need to fix in the tail feathers, I can do that. So I think proportions are looking much better now. If I need to add some little nuances in the shapes, move certain things a couple of millimeters down, up, to the left, to the right, whatever the case may be, I can do that now before moving forward. I'm gonna add in that little eye, and I'm gonna notice where in the head the eye is, what shape it has, what size it is in relation to the beak, to the size of the entire head, etc. I notice a bit of a flatness to this bird's head here, and then it's rounder here in front. I'm gonna add a little bit more detail into the beak, maybe the little nostril, the back edges, and I don't want to add too much detail into the eye, but just did some tiny bit of shading there. When it comes to the feathers, I am not going to draw each and every single individual feather in the wing there. What I like doing is I like noticing where the feathers change in shape and size. Usually it's going to happen throughout the wing and also the tail feathers. There are different types of feathers within the wing. What I like doing is just creating a subtle, faint, soft line there where I see the change in feather type. That is happening there. And then in this wing here, it's more difficult to see because of the position of the wing, but I think it's happening somewhere around there. I'm just gonna get that in to the best of my abilities. And is any of that change in feather type happening in the tail? Well, yes, I can also see that in the tail. So it's happening somewhere around here. The feathers kind of become longer in the bottom portion. So now that I have those dividing lines in and I've broken up my large wing shape into smaller sections, this is the point that I start separating out those medium-sized shapes into individual feathers, especially the bottom portion of the wing that has the longer feathers. I'm noticing the shape of the feathers and how they are overlapping. And I'm also cutting into the envelope, and I'm going to be removing those negative shapes left behind in between the feathers a little bit later. I'm not trying to get in every single feather that I see in the photo, especially because this is just a quick sketch, but that's kind of the general idea there. Just using that envelope and building in the feathers into it. I see an extra feather over here or two. And then for these smaller ones, really I'm just gonna sketch them in quickly. I'm just gonna subtly describe those feathers without taking too long to sketch them in. And then same thing with this wing. I know it's more difficult to see, but sometimes just starting at some point within this bottom portion of the wing and creating a line there, that gives you something to start with. You can start visualizing with that line and just notice how what you're able to see of the feathers really changes because of the position of the wing. I know that there are smaller feathers over here overlapping these in some sections, I would recommend not even adding them in initially. If you want to, you can add them in later after the larger shapes have been added in, but try not to get overwhelmed when you see those smaller shapes overlapping over the larger ones, because largest general shapes are going to always be more important to add in. And if those largest general shapes make sense, that's what's most important, right? Then you can start adding in the smaller ones if you want to. Okay, and I see a little bit of a feather effect over here, but what we see of this wing is very different from this one. The feathers will be way more cramped in this envelope because of what's going on. They're more compressed here. All right, and if you want to, you can just quickly erase the edges of your envelopes in the feathers and the little lines that you created in between the sections of the wing. I'm gonna first just separate out the little fingers with just lines and little teeny tiny claws, just with little curved short lines there. Be careful not to add in too much detail into bird feet because they are not that pretty. And if you start adding way too much detail, remember that things that have more detail are gonna have a greater visual weight, and you can accidentally start overly describing the bird's feet, and that will take away from the other more beautiful parts of the bird, right? More interesting, beautiful parts. I just quickly added in more detail into the feet, separated out the fingers with just a few lines, and then maybe added tiny short curves there for the claws, very subtle kind of claws. And for the tail, what I like doing oftentimes with the tail is starting with one of the middle feathers. And once that's in, you can just continue observing the photo and separating out the feathers. I'm not trying to create exactly the same amount of feathers that I see, just an approximation. I don't want to make too many or too few, because if I do, then that will change the size of the feathers in the bird's tail. As long as you get something that is near the feathers that you're seeing, especially for this quick sketch, that will be great. This feather over here at the end has a slightly different perspective. It goes up like that. Notice how I'm overlapping the feathers slightly. And over here they become smaller and smaller because that part of the bird is opposite to us. It's farther away. I'm gonna bring this in a little bit more. And we also have shorter feathers. I'm gonna change on over to my 4B pencil, and I'm just gonna quickly go over certain lines. Go over certain edges of feathers without being too precise. I'm keeping it loose. I'm noticing the shape of the bottom of this bird's feathers. Maybe I just deepen the pupil a tiny bit more without going overboard with the detail. And for this wing over here, I'm just gonna add in some feathers quite quickly. So if I wanted to add in some quick shading, just like what I did with the dog and the horse, I can do that with just quick filling in of areas where I see shadow in the inner part of the wing here, opposite to us. And then do a little bit more overlapping in deepest, darkest shadow areas. If I wanted to add in some context, maybe some trees or plants in the background, this is my B pencil again. And maybe I could just quickly sketch in some tree branches or something to provide more context to the sketch. I'm gonna go back to my 4B. All right, so I think that's enough for that sketch. I'm gonna go ahead and leave it at that, and I'm gonna move on to my very last sketch that I'm gonna be working on today, which is the more challenging bird. So let's talk about that one. Here is the second beautiful bird photo. So how is this bird photo or the pose present here? This type of bird has a pretty long neck. It's coming towards us. I would say that the closest part of this bird's body to us is probably the tip of its beak, and the body is receding away from us. So there is a certain level of foreshortening going on, though obviously when it comes to the largest body masses, the bird's head is still quite small in comparison to its rib cage and the back part of its body, or the bottom part of its body, the hips or the pelvis. Aside from this, the wings are huge, and because they're open and coming forwards, they are kind of wrapping or hugging around the majority of this bird's body. And all of these things make deciphering that spine line, or in this case our flow line, kind of challenging to do, because it's not easy to visualize the back of the bird's body. It's not easy to visualize where the location of the spine would be, because we have to see through the belly of the bird, if that makes sense. And because of how, especially this wing that is closer to us on the left, because of how much it's covering up that large part of the bird's body, it's hard to visualize that spine. So we have to make up for that information that we're visually lacking, which is quite a bit in this photo. Now, of course, I always want to encourage you to look for extra reference photos if you want to, or even videos to learn more about this particular type of bird before jumping in, because that's going to give you greater information on the bird's anatomy, which is going to make it easier for you, of course, to complete those sections of the bird's body which you can't see. So when it comes to this particular reference photo, I would approach my sketch differently. And it's important that you know this. It's important that you know that you're not going to be able to use the exact same step-by-step process with every single photo or thing, subject, whatever it is that you're trying to draw that is in front of you in real life. You need to use all of these different tools and important pieces of information that I have shared with you, and really observe, analyze before jumping in, and use your critical thinking skills and ask yourself, what is the best way to approach this particular subject? There are so many variables involved that you can't force the same process with every single situation. So when it comes to this one, I am simply going to start by enveloping things out. I'm going to start by just creating shapes that I see. I'm still going to do my best to start with the largest body masses, but because this very large wing nearest us is overlapping over so much of that, I'm going to be adding that wing very soon in the process here. I'm going to visualize this entire body of the bird. I'm going to tune out the neck and the head, and I'm just going to try to add in the largest part of the bird here. That largest shape for the bird's body that encapsulates or envelopes in the rib cage, that would be right here, and the pelvis or the hips would be over here somewhere. And in this case, because there is some foreshortening going on, and the upper part of the bird's body and the head are closer to us than the back part of the bird's body, the rib cage would overlap a bit over the hips. I'm doing my best to tune out this entire wing shape over here that is covering up so much of this part of the bird's body, and I'm also ignoring the neck and the head, because the neck and the head are way smaller than this part of the bird's body, the entire torso to back portion. That's what I'm trying to get in first. This edge back here is not the bottom edge of the tail feathers. It's actually where the body meets the tail section. That section where the end of its body starts turning into the tail. You can even see a plane change there. if you notice carefully, that's what it is. That's what I'm kind of encapsulating in here. It's still important to notice angles. It's still important to simplify as much as possible. That's kind of what I see there. Now, out of this large portion here comes the neck. I like adding in a circle where the neck starts in something like this. Try to notice where the upper edge of the neck is and compare that with the upper edge of the body that you have just created, where the back is. Once you have that circle where the neck is attached to this top part of the body, you can start creating that shape for the neck. And you can add that in as a flow line if you'd like, coming down like that and into the beak. Or you could even start turning that into a shape if it's more helpful for you. The bird's head would be somewhere around here, and then the beak would end somewhere around here. And you can create your horizontal guideline for yourself to notice if distances, if placements of elements are making sense. I may have to bring up this section, this back portion where the bird's body ends, because what I'm noticing is that this edge where the bottom part of the bird's body meets the tail is higher above the bottom edge of its beak. So if I had kept that there, the beak wouldn't come down as low as that. So I'm going to shorten the bird's body a little bit more. And now I can create a little shape for its beak. And I'm noticing an angle there, a rounded beak. So now this is a lot closer. If I draw this horizontal line where the bottom ends of the bird's body turns into the tail, now my beak is coming down lower than that. So it makes much more sense. I'm just gonna leave this at that, very simplified shape for now, because I need to continue building and focus on developing proportions before moving forward to the details. I can erase unnecessary lines that I don't need anymore. And this is looking quite weird right now. I need to continue building this. So I'm gonna start adding in the wings, which are huge shapes in this particular situation. So I'm just gonna notice the back edge of this wing, more or less where it falls in relation with what would be the edge here of the body, if I were able to see through them. And I'm noticing the angles that they create, any major curves. This comes in like that, and then it kind of covers up this entire portion here. Comes down. How much lower does this point here come down when compared to the bottom edge here? It goes down lower than that. So I bring that shape down. I can erase all of this. And then this wing over here is a bit of a challenge as well, because it curves, it flips, the planes flip. I'm just gonna add a shape in, similar to what I see in the photo. And what I'm gonna do here where the planes flip is I'm gonna add in an extra shape. And what I mean by this is here is the shape created by the inner portion of the wing, the inner planes. And then in here where the planes change because of that curve, I do this, where we're now able to see the outer part or the upper part of the wings here because they're curving in. So you can see how I separated those into two shapes. Whereas with this wing over here, we don't see any curves like that. We just see the outer or upper part of the wing and none of the inner part of the wing. In here, we do see the inner part of the wing and the outer or upper part of the wing. So still keeping things very simple and very envelope-y. And I'm now going to start adding in the legs, the tail, and the feet. So the tail is a pretty large shape, or medium-sized shape, I should say. And I want to add that in before starting with the feet, because the feet and the legs are a smaller shape than the tail. So that's always helpful to work from largest to smallest. So I'm going to add that in there. The tail, maybe that's a little bit too big, I think. And now I can start adding in the legs. This leg right here is partially covered by this wing. So I'm first adding in the thigh, and then it changes into the bottom part of the leg, the orange section. And these are the major angles that I see for that part of the leg. this foot is quite closed and this one is open. So I'm just enveloping out that foot, creating a simple shape. And I'm noticing where this foot shape falls within this larger tail feather shape, and noticing if things are making sense so far. So now when it comes to this thigh, it's pretty close to the neck, actually, this thigh. I'm going to ignore what my brain is telling me to do. My brain would tell me to add in this thigh over here in the bottom of the bird's body, very close to this leg. But no, that's not what's happening in that reference photo. It's actually pretty close to the neck because the neck is coming down way, way low. So I'm gonna just add in this thigh first, then the color and texture changes right here. And then it goes down at an angle. And this one is open. So I'm just going to simplify this into triangular shape at the bottom there. And then it's kind of something like that. I'm noticing in my sketch that the head is closer to this foot than in the photo. In the photo, I'm noticing a larger negative space between this edge of the thigh and the leg and the head than what is present in my sketch. So really all I have to do is change the location of my head. So I'm gonna place the cranium far more to the right and a little bit above what I had initially placed. So I'm gonna do the head shape there, and I'm gonna end the beak somewhere around here, that point of the beak, because what I'm noticing is that the beak shouldn't come down way past this point in the foot. Notice how the bottom of the beak, if I were to draw a slightly diagonal line, they're pretty close. I don't want to bring down the beak way past that. I could accidentally be making the neck extra long and mess up the proportions. So that's way closer to what I see there. All right, so what am I missing in terms of elements that I want to make sure to add in? Do I need to refine anything? I think I need to bring down this part of the bird's body a little bit, and then make sure that the neck is connecting properly into the body. Okay, I can erase this line back here because the thigh is overlapping that shape. All right, so things are looking pretty good to me, I think. I'm just at that spot where I am moving things a little bit more to the left, to the right, bringing it up, bringing it down. Whatever you need to do, continue comparing your sketch with that reference photo over and over and over. So I'm gonna add in a little bit more detail into the bird's head. So where does the beak end? I'm gonna just add in a little kind of tick mark there. Definitely need to round out the beak more at the bottom. And I can just notice the shape of the beak that we're able to see from this perspective, from this vantage point. Changes color here. Where are the nostrils? And then we're able to see a little bit of this eye. How close is this eye that we are able to entirely see to the edge of the head and also to the beak? And how large is it? And what shape is it? And finally, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do the same thing that I did with the previous bird and separate out the wings into the different feather types. I'm able to see the longest feathers down here, so I'm just gonna create an irregular line where I see those larger feathers, largest over here at the top, then smaller as I make my way down. So that's why that irregular shape is tapered. And then I see another change in feather type somewhere around there. And I'm just making this very rough. I'm not being super precise or anything, but I do see smaller feathers up here, then kind of medium-sized feathers somewhere around this area, and then the biggest feathers are over here at the bottom. With this wing over here, it's way more difficult to tell because it's in shadow. because we're only able to see the inner portion of the wing. What I can do is I can just make sure to shade that in a little bit more and maybe just create a hint of feathers when I am adding in a feather texture and more detail later on. So that's all I'm gonna do there. In the tail, I'm not able to see a large change in feathers. I do see a second kind of section here that is flatter. There is a flatter section here, so I just separated that out. And then in this section here, I can start with the middle feather, and then I can just notice the size and the shape in those feathers in the photo and start kind of separating out a few feathers. I want to create overlapping shapes. Here, I'm just going to start separating out these feathers. The same way that I did with the first bird, I'm just trying to notice their size, their shape at the end, how they are overlapping, the negative spaces created in between the feathers, which I'm going to erase out in a little bit, so that my feathers look somewhat believable without being too bogged down with creating everything just exactly the same as I see it in that reference photo. There is really no need. The feather shape, if you notice, which you should be paying attention when you are drawing or painting feathers, it's just like when you're drawing or painting hair, you need to pay attention to the size of the feather, or the length of the feather, I should say, and also the direction of the feather growth. And in this specific situation, you can see how the angle of the feather changes from this, and then it becomes more horizontal, and then it shifts up. So you should see how that angle is changing when you're adding in the feathers. Even though there is a lot of looseness and imperfection in terms of how I'm adding in my feathers, and I'm doing it quite quickly, and my feathers are not exactly the same as what you're seeing in the reference photo, I make sure that I know what to look for so that my sketch can look somewhat believable at the end. And that's one of the major key things that you want to look for, is the length of the feather and the direction of the feather growth. There are certain things that we can get away with, and as long as the amount of feathers and the shape of the feather and the size of the feathers are approximately what you're seeing in the reference, it's still going to look believable. But the things that really have to be there, it's just very important that it's there. Okay, and here we have shorter feathers. I'm just going to add in smaller shapes. And then in here, I'm going to bring up a feather shape, bring out another one here, and then they slightly start to change angle. And in here, I'm just going to faintly indicate a little separation there for the feathers. And I'm just going to add in a subtle texture in a bit. I'm going to finish this sketch by separating out the fingers, adding in an extra little. And here we have webbed feet. So I don't actually have to erase out that extra shape because it's not really a negative shape because there's skin there. So I'm just going to create that illusion of little fingers. And if you want to add in a tiny bit of a claw, be very subtle and just create a little tiny curve there at the end. I'm going to add in a little bit of shadow into the eye. For this one, perhaps I want to create some drops of water. This bird usually hangs around water areas, so perhaps adding a little bit of context of splashing water could help enhance that illusion of movement and could help add a dynamic look to our drawing. Just add a little bit of context there. Okay, so now I'm going to switch on over to my 4B pencil, and I'm going to quickly finish up this sketch by darkening certain edges, adding a little bit more detail and texture. And I'm just going to be very loose and very expressive here. I'm continuing to observe my reference photo though. You could even add the middle vein or shaft in the in some of the feathers if you want, but I would recommend not being very stiff with your line. If you're gonna add in that middle vein, try to get in that line with a lesser visual weight than the lines that you create for the outer edges of your shapes. Gonna add in some quick shading here in the inner part of the wing, here beneath this wing nearest us. And there you go. There's this last sketch completely finished. So here are my 2 bird sketches. Very different types of birds, very different types of positions. I hope that this second approach made sense and why I used a different kind of approach made sense. Did you enjoy this tutorial? I really hope you did. And if so, make sure to check out everything that I am offering over at my Patreon membership website, because for a very small amount a month, you're going to get immediate access to my exclusive tutorials, classes, and resources that I don't share anywhere else. All of these exclusive tutorials include my downloadable outline sketches so that you don't have to start from scratch, reference photos, and my supply lists. There's already a library of over 75 sketching and watercolor painting tutorials that are real-time, meaning they are not sped up or edited. They are fully narrated, and I take you through my entire process, making sure to explain everything as clearly as possible, step by step. 2 new exclusive full-length tutorials are added into this exclusive library every single month. For those of you who are interested in really taking your artwork to the next level and want to know all of the inside secrets that I learned about in art school and courses that I've invested in myself, there's also a full library on classes on art fundamentals in which all of the bases are covered. That library has now over 35 classes and workshops. All have assignments at the end that help you actually put your knowledge to the test. And there's a brand new class or workshop added at the beginning of every single month. As if all of this weren't enough, you also get a weekly sketchbook prompt sent to your inbox to help you stay consistent with your art practice. There's a live training, workshop, or paint-along session with me every single month. Members in the $15 tier and upwards get access to thorough feedback from me on their work whenever they need it, and much more. There are different tiers that you can join that give you access to different things, which you can choose from depending on your goals and needs. So go ahead and check it out. I'm going to make sure to leave a link where you can find out more down below in the description box of this video. And I would love to get to know more about you and your work and have you join this innermost art community of mine. All right, you guys, that is going to do it for today's video. I really hope that you enjoyed it and that you found it helpful. And if you did, pretty please make sure to give this video a thumbs up, because it really helps support the work that I am doing here on YouTube and helps others get to know about my channel. Thank you so much for watching today. Don't forget to subscribe and click on that little bell so that you can be notified of when I share my new videos, which happens every single week. Have a beautiful rest of the day and see you soon. Bye guys.